The diner sat on the corner of 5th and Main like it had always been there, like it had grown up from the cracked asphalt the same way weeds push through sidewalks in this part of Riverdale, Oregon. The sign read Rosie's Diner, though the first letter had flickered out 3 winters ago and nobody had bothered to fix it. The locals knew what it said. The locals knew everything about this place, which was precisely why they noticed when someone new walked in. It was a Saturday, July 15th, 1995. 12 minutes past noon when she pushed through the door. Eleanor Thornton was 70 years old, and she moved like a woman who had learned that the world would not make room for her. Her left leg dragged slightly with each step, a limp that had grown worse over the past 2 years, though she could no longer remember a time when walking had been easy. She clutched a small purse against her stomach. The zipper was broken. The leather cracked at the corners. Inside that purse, folded between grocery receipts from a life she no longer lived, was a key she had been carrying for 23 months. The diner was full. Every booth, every stool at the counter, every table by the window. The lunch rush in a small town was a ritual, a gathering of familiar faces who came as much for the company as for the coffee. And not one of those faces looked at Eleanor Thornton with anything resembling welcome. She approached the first booth where Harold and Mildred Patterson sat across from each other like they had for 46 years of marriage. Harold was cutting his meatloaf into precise squares. Mildred was stirring her iced tea with a spoon that clinked against the glass in a rhythm as old as their wedding vows. "Excuse me," Eleanor said. Her voice was quieter than she intended. "I was wondering if I might sit with you, just while I have some coffee." Mildred looked up. Her eyes traveled the length of Eleanor's frame, taking in the worn coat buttoned too high for the weather, the orthopedic shoes with their uneven wear, the slight tremor in the hand that gripped the purse. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile people give to strangers they have already decided not to help. "I'm sorry, dear, we're expecting someone." They were not expecting anyone. Eleanor knew this in the way you know things without being told, in the way you learn to read rejection before it speaks. She nodded once, a small movement that cost her more than anyone watching would have guessed, and turned toward the next possibility. By the jukebox, 4 men in work boots and denim sat around a table meant for two. They had dragged extra chairs from somewhere, arranged themselves in that loose, easy way of men who had known each other since grade school. One of them was telling a story about a transmission he had rebuilt. The others were laughing in the right places. Eleanor stopped at the edge of their circle. "Pardon me," she said. "Would any of you mind if I borrowed a chair?" The one telling the story, a thick-necked man with grease still visible in the creases of his palms, barely glanced in her direction. "Sorry, ma'am, we're using them all." She looked at the empty chair beside him, the one where his jacket hung. She did not point this out. She had learned long ago that pointing out the obvious only made people defensive, only made them double down on whatever lie they had chosen to tell themselves. The corner booth by the emergency exit held a young mother and her 2 children. The boy was perhaps 7, the girl a few years younger. They were coloring on paper placemats while their mother scrolled through her phone with the particular intensity of someone trying to disappear into a screen. The bench across from them was empty. "I don't mean to bother you," Eleanor said, "but would it be all right if I sat here, just for a few minutes?" The mother looked up. There was no cruelty in her face, no malice, just the exhausted weariness of someone who had too many demands on her attention already. Someone who could not add one more person to the list of people who needed something from her. "Actually, we're leaving soon. My kids need room to spread out their stuff." The children had not spread out anything. They were coloring in silence, hunched over their placemats like monks illuminating manuscripts. But Eleanor nodded again, that same small nod, and moved on. She was running out of options. The counter was full. The other booths held groups of 2 and 3 and 4, people wrapped up in conversations that had been going on for years, inside jokes and shared histories that functioned like walls. She was beginning to wonder if she would have to leave, if she would have to walk back out into the parking lot and face the fact that she had failed. And then she saw him. He sat alone in the last booth, the one closest to the restrooms, the one nobody wanted because the fluorescent light above it buzzed and flickered. His leather vest was faded and worn, patches sewn onto patches, the kind of garment that told stories if you knew how to read them. His beard was streaked with gray, trimmed close to his jaw. His hands were wrapped around a cup of black coffee, and he was staring at nothing in particular. Or perhaps at everything. He looked like the kind of man people crossed the street to avoid. Eleanor Thornton had spent 70 years learning to read people. She had been a teacher for 31 of those years. 4th grade. the age when children were still open enough to show you who they really were. She had learned to see past the surface, past the behaviors that others mistook for character. She had learned that the loudest boys were often the most frightened, that the quietest girls were often the most dangerous, that the children everyone else dismissed were often the ones most worth knowing. She looked at the man in the leather vest, and she did not see what everyone else saw. She saw someone who was paying attention. She crossed the diner, her limp more pronounced now because she was tired, because the walk from where the mail carrier had dropped her off had been longer than she remembered. She stopped at the edge of his booth and waited. He looked up. His eyes were pale blue, the color of winter sky, and they held neither welcome nor rejection. They simply observed, taking her in the way she had seen him take in the room, cataloging details, noting what others had missed. She did not ask. She had asked everyone else, and asking had gotten her nowhere. Instead, she simply stood there, her purse clutched against her stomach. Her weight shifted onto her right leg to spare the left, and she waited for him to decide. He reached across the table and pulled out the chair. Sit. It was not an invitation. It was not a kindness. It was simply a statement of fact. A door being opened because doors were meant to open. Because that was what you did when someone needed to sit down. She lowered herself into the chair slowly, carefully. The way you move when you are not certain your body will cooperate. The vinyl was cracked and cold through the thin fabric of her dress. The table was scarred with the initials of teenagers who had carved their names decades ago. Declarations of love that had probably faded long before the wood healed. But she was sitting. For the first time in 2 hours, she was sitting. Thank you, she said. He nodded once and went back to his coffee. A waitress appeared, younger than Eleanor expected, with tired eyes and a name tag that read Sarah. She set down a menu, but Eleanor waved it away. Just coffee, please. And toast. Plain toast. You want butter? Jam? No, ma'am, just toast. Sarah's eyebrows lifted slightly, a question she did not ask. And then she was gone. The man in the leather vest did not speak. He did not ask her name or where she had come from or why she was here. He simply sat in his silence, comfortable with it in a way that told Eleanor he had spent years learning to be alone. But he watched her. She could feel his attention the way you feel sunlight through a window, present even when you are not looking at it. Her coffee came. Her toast came. She stared at both for a long moment, her hands flat on the table on either side of the plate, and something in her expression made the man set down his cup. You going to eat that? She looked up. Yes. Yes, Her voice trailed off. She picked up a piece of toast and took a small bite, chewing mechanically, swallowing with effort. She took another bite. Another. The man watched her eat the way you watch someone doing something they have forgotten how to do, relearning motions that should have been automatic. When she reached for her coffee, her hand was shaking. The cup rattled against the saucer. She steadied it with her other hand, brought it to her lips, and drank. Outside, a truck rumbled past. Inside, the jukebox switched from one country song to another. The Patterson couple paid their bill and left without looking in Eleanor's direction. The mother with the 2 children gathered her kids and their crayons and their placemats and headed for the door. The workman by the jukebox ordered another round of pie. Eleanor set down her cup and looked at the man across from her. I'm not supposed to be outside. The words came out before she could stop them. Before she could weigh them and measure them and decide whether they were safe to say. They simply emerged like water finding a crack in a dam, like something that had been held too long, finally breaking free. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. Says who? My nephew. She paused, her fingers tightening around the cup. He says it's not safe, that I might get confused, wander off. Do you get confused? She met his eyes then, really met them. And in that moment, something passed between them that neither of them could have named. A recognition, an understanding, a shared awareness that some questions are not really questions, that some answers are not really answers, that sometimes the truth hides in the space between words. No, she said, I do not get confused. The man nodded slowly. His name was Jack Morrison, though he would not tell her that for another hour. And by then it would not matter because she would already know everything important about him. He had been riding with the club for 22 years. He had done time in the service before that. 2 tours in the Gulf, sand and oil fires and nights so dark you could feel them pressing against your skin. He had learned to read people the hard way. Learned that the worst dangers never announce themselves. Learned that evil wore 1,000 faces and most of them were smiling. He looked at Eleanor Thornton, and he did not see a confused old woman who had wandered away from her caretaker. He saw the bruise on her wrist, faint but deliberate, the kind of mark that comes from fingers closing too tight. He saw the way she favored her left side when she shifted in her seat, protecting something that hurt. He saw the coat buttoned up to her chin despite the warmth of the diner, hiding whatever was underneath. He saw the shoes worn unevenly, like someone who had been walking on hard surfaces for hours, for days, for longer than anyone should have to walk. He saw the way she flinched when the door swung open too hard, the way her eyes cut to the parking lot every few minutes, counting something, measuring something, the way her hands never stopped moving, touching her purse, touching her pocket, reassuring herself that something was still there. "How'd you get out today?" he asked. She hesitated. The question hung between them like smoke, like something that could either clear or suffocate, depending on which way the wind blew. "He had a meeting, left early. I knew I had maybe 2 hours." She lowered her voice, though no one in the diner was paying them any attention. "I caught a ride with the woman who delivers his mail. She drops packages at the house sometimes. She thinks I'm visiting from out of town." Jack waited. "She doesn't ask questions," Eleanor finished. "2 hours before what?" She did not answer. She looked at the door again, and Jack understood. 2 hours before Derek came back. 2 hours before he noticed she was gone. 2 hours before whatever consequences she had learned to fear. He did not push. Pushing was for amateurs. For people who did not understand that trust was built slowly, like a house, one board at a time. Instead, he signaled Sarah for more coffee and settled back in his seat. "Tell me about your nephew," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, weighing him, measuring him the way she had measured so many children in so many classrooms, trying to see past the surface to whatever lay beneath. And then she began to talk. "His name is Derek Whitmore. He's my sister's son. My sister passed 12 years ago, same year as my husband. Heart attack, both of them. 3 months apart, like they couldn't stand to be in the same world without each other." Jack nodded. He understood that kind of loss. He had his own, carried in a place he did not show to strangers. Derek was always polite, always well-dressed. He works in finance, something with investments. I never quite understood it, but he was successful. Had a nice house on the other side of town. Drove a German car. Went to the right church. Knew all the right people. She paused and something shifted in her face. A shadow passed behind her eyes. The kind of shadow that came from seeing something clearly for the first time. Or perhaps from finally admitting what she had seen all along. "After my husband died, I lived alone for a while. Managed fine. I had friends from my quilting circle. A neighbor who'd stop by for coffee. Church on Sundays. A life that, while quiet, was mine." Jack heard the past tense in her words. Was mine. Then Derek started visiting, started suggesting things, little things at first. "Maybe I shouldn't drive anymore. Too many accidents in the news. Too many elderly people running red lights. Maybe I should let him handle my bills. So confusing. All those numbers, all those due dates. Maybe I should think about moving. Too many stairs in my old house. Too much upkeep. What if I fell? What if something happened and no one found me for days?" Her voice had taken on a quality Jack recognized. The flatness of someone reciting a story they had told themselves too many times. The dullness of someone who had stopped feeling the words because feeling them was too dangerous. He painted a picture of danger that didn't exist, but he painted it so well that even I started to believe it. Jack's hands tightened around his coffee cup. He knew this story. He had heard versions of it before in different voices with different details, but always the same shape. The slow erosion, the gradual isolation, the way predators separated their prey from the herd, one small step at a time, until there was nowhere left to run. "So I moved into his house," Eleanor continued, "into what used to be his garage. He'd converted it into a small room. A bed, a chair, a space heater that doesn't always work. The walls are thin, the window doesn't open." She looked down at her coffee, at the dark surface reflecting nothing. "There's a lock on the door, but it's on the outside." Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. He had felt it before. In the desert. In the moments before everything went wrong. It was the feeling of understanding something terrible, of seeing the shape of something monstrous emerging from the shadows. "He explained that away too," Eleanor said. "For my safety. In case I wandered at night. In case I got confused." The way she said the word confused told Jack everything. It was the word Derek used. The word that had been weaponized against her. The word that transformed a sharp, intelligent woman into something fragile. Something to be managed. Something to be controlled. Jack leaned forward slightly. His voice was low, steady, carrying no more emotion than a stone. You don't get confused. No. She met his eyes again. I taught fourth grade for 31 years. I managed a household budget through 2 recessions. I raised a daughter mostly alone because my husband worked nights. Something flickered in her expression. Pain, old and deep, the kind that never fully healed. My daughter died when she was 31. Cancer took her in 8 months, and I survived that. I buried my husband and my daughter and my sister, and I survived. I am not confused. She said the last 3 words like a declaration, like a flag planted on contested ground. Jack nodded once. He believed her. More than that, he recognized her. She was a survivor the same way he was a survivor. The same way everyone who made it through the worst things found a way to keep going. But surviving was not the same as living. And whatever Derek Whitmore had built around her, it was not a life. He told everyone he was taking care of me, Eleanor said. And everyone believed him because Derek is the kind of man people trust. He wears pressed shirts. He speaks in measured tones. He attends city council meetings. He volunteers at the food bank. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Respectability. That's the disguise. That's how evil hides. Behind good manners, behind clean shirts, behind words like family and responsibility. Jack understood this too. He had spent his whole life being judged by his appearance, by the leather and the patches and the rumble of his motorcycle. He had been followed in stores, turned away from restaurants, watched by police for no reason other than what he looked like. And meanwhile, men like Derek Whitmore glided through the world untouched, protected by their suits and their smiles. Eleanor reached into her purse and withdrew something. A key, small, brass, attached to a plastic tag with a number written on it. Unit 47. She set it on the table between them. Pine Self-Storage. On the highway past the old mill, she pushed the key toward him. I've been renting that unit for almost 2 years. Since before Derek took my checkbook. Since before he changed the passwords on my accounts. Since before I understood what was really happening. Jack looked at the key but did not touch it. What's in it? Everything I could save. Everything I could document. Insurance papers he forged. Medical records for doctor appointments I never went to. Letters from friends that were returned to sender because he told the post office I had moved. She paused. And a note that says, if I disappear, this is why. Jack felt the cold thing in his chest expand, pressing against his ribs. He had been right. This was not confusion. This was not an old woman losing her grip on reality. This was something far more deliberate, far more dangerous. Eleanor looked at the clock on the wall. An hour and 40 minutes had passed since she walked through the door. I have to go soon. If I'm not back before he comes home. She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. Jack picked up the key. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of it, understanding what it represented. 2 years of careful planning. 2 years of gathering evidence while trapped in a room with a lock on the outside. 2 years of waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right chance. Why me? He asked. Eleanor smiled for the first time since she had walked into the diner. It was a small smile, tired and sad, but real, because everyone else in this room looked at me and saw a problem. She gestured at the booths around them, at the people who had turned her away. They saw someone who would need something from them, someone who would disrupt their lunch, someone who would ask them to pay attention when they didn't want to. She looked at Jack directly. But you just saw a woman who needed to sit down, and you said yes. Jack did not know what to say to that. He had spent 22 years with the club, doing things that most people would never understand. He had done things he was not proud of. He had done things he would never speak about. But he had also done things that mattered, things that made a difference, things that reminded him why he got up in the morning. This felt like one of those things. Eleanor stood slowly, carefully, bracing herself against the table. She left a $5 bill beside her empty cup, more than twice what the coffee and toast had cost. I can't tell you what to do with that key, she said. I can only tell you what's there. And I can tell you that if someone doesn't do something soon, there won't be anything left to find. She turned to leave. Jack watched her move toward the door, that uneven gait, that careful navigation of obstacles only she could see. And then something happened. The key slipped from her purse. It clattered to the floor near the door, spinning once before coming to rest against the base of the jukebox. Eleanor did not stop. She did not turn around. She pushed through the door and was gone, limping across the parking lot toward a white sedan where the mail carrier waited. Jack sat for a moment, staring at the key on the floor. Then he stood, crossed the diner, and picked it up. Sarah was watching him from behind the counter. She had been watching the whole time, he realized. Watching and listening and not saying anything. "You know her?" Jack asked. Sarah shook her head. Then she paused, reconsidering. "Not really. She comes in sometimes. Always alone. Always orders the same thing. Always leaves too much money." She looked toward the door, toward the parking lot where the white sedan was already pulling away. "She slipped me a note once, about 6 months ago, gave me a $5 bill with something written on the back." Jack waited. It said, "If I don't come back, it's not because I didn't want to." She met Jack's eyes, and there was something in her expression. A recognition, a shared understanding of what those words meant. "I should have done something," Sarah said. "I should have told someone. But I thought—" She trailed off. But Jack knew what she had thought. She had thought it was not her business. She had thought someone else would notice. She had thought the polite thing to do was to mind her own business and let people handle their own problems. Jack understood. He had thought those things once too, a long time ago, before his brother Danny. That night, Jack Morrison sat alone in his apartment above the auto shop on 3rd Street. It was a small space, one room, kitchen in the corner, bathroom no bigger than a closet. But it was his, had been since Linda died 3 years ago. Cancer. Same disease that had taken Eleanor's daughter. Same cruel mathematics of cells dividing when they shouldn't, spreading when they should stop. He sat at the small table and stared at the key Eleanor had left. Unit 47, Pine Self-Storage. A metal door hiding 2 years of careful documentation. 2 years of a woman locked in a room, gathering evidence, waiting for someone to care. Jack thought about his brother Danny, thought about the call he'd gotten 4 years ago. Danny Morrison, age 43, massive stroke, left side paralyzed, speech gone. Everything that made Danny who he was, locked inside a body that no longer worked. Jack had found a place. Cedar Ridge Nursing Home. Nice facility, or at least it looked nice. Clean hallways, friendly staff, brochures with smiling elderly people doing puzzles and gardening. He'd signed the papers, paid the deposit, told himself Danny would be taken care of. And then Jack had gone back to his life. The club, the road, the freedom that came from not being tied down. He visited when he could, once a month, sometimes less. Danny couldn't talk anymore anyway. Couldn't tell Jack what was happening. Couldn't explain that the nice facility with the friendly staff was slowly killing him. By the time Jack noticed the weight loss, the bed sores, the way Danny wouldn't look at him anymore, it was too late. Danny died on a Tuesday morning while Jack was 2 states away, rebuilding an engine. Died alone in that room. No family, no friends, just the nice people at Cedar Ridge who had let him waste away because it was easier than actually caring. Jack had blamed himself ever since. For not seeing, for not asking, for assuming someone else was paying attention. He would not make that mistake again. He picked up the phone and dialed. Bull Hayes answered on the 3rd ring. "Yeah?" Jack's voice was steady. "Emergency club meeting, tonight, 1 hour. Bull didn't ask questions. He'd served with Jack in the Gulf, knew that tone, the one that meant something serious, something that couldn't wait. "I'll make the calls," Bull said, and hung up. The Iron Brotherhood clubhouse sat at the end of a dirt road 5 miles outside Riverdale. It had been a warehouse once, then a mechanic's shop, then nothing at all for years before the club bought it and made it their own. Now it was home, or the closest thing to home that most of them had. By the time Jack arrived on his Harley, the parking lot was already filling up. Motorcycles in neat rows, American flags and POW MIA flags flying from poles at the entrance. The building itself was weathered wood and corrugated metal, but inside it was warm. Wood paneling on the walls, neon beer signs glowing in the dim light, a jukebox in the corner playing Merle Haggard, the smell of motor oil and cigarette smoke and coffee. 15 men gathered in the main room, some sitting, some standing, all watching Jack as he walked to the center. Bull Hayes stood near the bar, arms crossed, waiting. Jack didn't waste time. He told them about Eleanor, about the diner, about Derek and the locked room and the 2 years of evidence hidden in a storage unit. He told them about the key she'd dropped. Not an accident, a choice, a test, to see if he would pick it up, to see if he would care. When he finished, the room was silent. Then Tiny Mitchell spoke. 6'5", 280 pounds of muscle and ink. But his voice was soft, gentle. "My grandmother," he said, "same thing happened to her. Nursing home said she was declining, said she was confused. But when I visited, she was sharp as ever. Sharp enough to know they weren't taking care of her, sharp enough to be scared, but not strong enough to get out. He paused. She died while I was deployed, alone because I didn't do anything. Bull Hayes stepped forward. My brother, he said, elder abuse, home care aide he trusted, stole his meds, left him in pain. He killed himself to end it. And the aide walked free because the system didn't give a damn about an old man with no family. Jack looked around the room, saw it in all their faces. The recognition, the shared history of failing people who needed them. The guilt that came from looking away when they should have stepped closer. So here's the question, Jack said. Do we help her? He didn't need to explain what help meant. Didn't need to spell out that this wasn't club business, that there was no profit in it, no territory, no revenge, just an old woman locked in a room, waiting to die. Bull Hayes, chapter president for 8 years, called for a vote. All in favor of helping Eleanor Thornton? 15 hands went up, not one hesitation. Then we're Iron Brotherhood, Bull said. We protect our own, and Eleanor Thornton is one of ours. The next morning, Sunday, Jack rode to Pine Self-Storage with Bull, Ghost Murphy, and Tiny. 4 men on 4 motorcycles, engines rumbling through the quiet Oregon countryside. The storage facility was on the highway, past the old lumber mill that had closed 10 years ago. Rows of metal doors painted industrial green, minimal security, a camera at the office, but the office was closed on weekends. Unit 47 was in the back corner, away from everything. Exactly where you'd put something if you didn't want anyone to see. Jack used Eleanor's key. The lock clicked. The door squealed as it swung open. Inside was an 8x8 space, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Jack pulled the chain and light filled the unit. 3 cardboard bonds stacked against one wall, a metal filing cabinet in the corner, a plastic bin with a lid sitting on top of the cabinet. Jack opened the first box. Life insurance policies with Eleanor's name. Beneficiary had been changed from her deceased husband to Derek Whitmore. The signature looked wrong, shaky, recent. Not the same handwriting as the note she'd written. Forged. Bank statements came next. Ghost studied them with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years in Army intelligence, following money trails, connecting dots. Before Derek, Eleanor had $127,000 in savings. After Derek moved her into his house, withdrawals started. $5,000 here, $10,000 there, $20,000 in a single month. By the time the statements ended, her balance was $3,400. $387,000 gone in 2 years. The second box held medical records, appointments, lab results, prescriptions, all documenting Eleanor's declining cognitive function. Progressive dementia requires full-time supervision. Ghost pulled out his cell phone, one of the big brick models that cost a fortune in '95, and made a call. The doctor listed on the records, Dr. Harold Patterson, had died in 1992, 3 years before these appointments supposedly happened. The clinic, Riverside Medical Associates, didn't exist. Never had. The records were fake. Derek building a paper trail to explain Eleanor's eventual decline, her eventual death. The third box was letters, dozens of them, addressed to Eleanor Thornton, all marked return to sender. From friends, Barbara, Helen, Ruth, people who'd tried to reach her, people who'd worried. But Derek had intercepted every letter, told the post office Eleanor had moved, left no forwarding address, made her invisible. Jack opened one letter from Barbara, dated 14 months earlier. Dear Ellie, it read, I've tried calling, but your number doesn't work anymore. I stopped by the house, but there was a for sale sign in the yard. Are you all right? Please write back. I'm worried about you. Eleanor had never received it, never knew Barbara was worried, never knew anyone was looking. She'd sat in that garage room believing she'd been forgotten, believing no one cared. Bull's voice was rough. He made her invisible. Ghost opened the filing cabinet, found the deed to Eleanor's house, transferred to Derek 1 month after she moved in, found the power of attorney documents giving Derek full control, found the will, changed, everything going to Derek when she died. All of it legal, on paper. Derek hadn't broken any laws. Eleanor had signed everything, or at least that's what the documents said. The signatures were forged, but they looked real enough. Good enough to fool a lawyer. Good enough to fool a judge. The system was designed to protect people like Derek Whitmore. Tiny lifted the lid off the plastic bin. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. The script was shaky, the way Eleanor's hand had shaken when she'd reached for her coffee. Jack read it aloud. his voice steady but something burning behind his eyes. If you are reading this, something has happened. My name is Eleanor Thornton and I am 70 years old. I am not confused. I am not ill. I am not losing my mind. My nephew Derek Whitmore has taken everything from me. My home, my money, my freedom, my voice. He keeps me in a room with a lock on the outside. He controls what I eat, when I sleep, who I see. He tells everyone I am declining. He tells everyone he is taking care of me. He is waiting for me to die. I do not know how much longer I have, but I know this. If I disappear, it will not be because I wandered away. It will not be because I got confused. It will be because Derek decided I was no longer useful. This is my proof. This is my truth. This is the only voice I have left. Please find someone who will listen. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with understanding, with rage, with the terrible knowledge that this had been happening for 2 years. 2 years of Eleanor alone in that room, documenting her own imprisonment, waiting for someone to care enough to look. She did this herself, Tiny said, and his voice cracked. All of it, piece by piece. While he thought she was locked away and helpless, she was building a case, gathering evidence, waiting for someone to find it. Bull looked at Jack. And she picked you. Jack didn't respond. He was thinking about the diner, about Eleanor standing at the edge of his booth, not asking, just waiting, testing to see if he was the kind of man who would pull out a chair, the kind of man who would say yes when everyone else said no. She didn't pick me because I'm special, Jack said finally. She picked me because I said yes. Ghost opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet and went very still. Found something, he said. It was a folder. Marked final arrangements in neat handwriting that wasn't Eleanor's. Inside was a prearranged funeral plan from Morrison and Sons Funeral Home, dated 1 month ago. Name of deceased, Eleanor Thornton. Services requested, closed casket, no viewing, immediate cremation, no autopsy. Jack stared at the document. He's already planned her funeral. Before she's dead. Ghost's voice was flat. Cremation means no body, no evidence, no autopsy. When he kills her, there won't be anything left to examine. Bull looked at each of them in turn. Then we're out of time. Derek's not waiting for nature to take its course. He's planning to murder her. And soon. Jack folded Eleanor's note carefully and put it in his pocket. Tonight, he said, we get her out tonight before Derek can do whatever he's planning. The 4 men stood in that storage unit, surrounded by 2 years of evidence. 2 years of one woman's desperate fight to be seen, to be heard, to matter. And they made a promise. Eleanor Thornton would not die in that room, would not be erased, would not become another story of an old woman who wandered off and was never found. They would get her out. They would cite Derek. They would make sure the world knew what he was. And if the system wouldn't do it, then they would, because they were Iron Brotherhood. And they protected their own. The clubhouse smelled like coffee and old leather when the 4 men returned that Sunday evening. The sun was dropping toward the coast range, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if any of them had been in the mood to notice. They weren't. They'd spent the afternoon photographing every document in that storage unit, every forged signature, every stolen dollar, every letter that had never reached its destination. 2 years of evidence that told the story of a woman being slowly erased from existence. Jack spread the photographs across the long wooden table in the center of the room. Bull stood at one end, arms crossed, studying the images with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent decades reading intelligence reports. Ghost sat in a chair nearby, a yellow legal pad in front of him, already making notes. Tiny paced the room like a caged animal, too angry to sit still. We need to know everything about Derek Whitmore, Jack said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Where he works, where he goes, who he knows, what he's afraid of. Ghost nodded. I'll have a full workup by tomorrow. Financial records, property holdings, court records if there are any. People talk in this town. Someone knows something. Bull leaned forward over the photographs. What about Eleanor? We can't leave her in that house while we're gathering intel. Every day she's there is another day he didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They'd all seen the funeral arrangements. Immediate cremation. No autopsy. Derek was planning something and the clock was ticking. We move fast, Jack said. Ghost runs background. Tiny and I start surveillance tomorrow. Map his routine. Find his vulnerabilities. By Tuesday night, we go in and get her out. What if he calls the cops when she's missing? Tiny asked. Reports her as a confused old lady who wandered off. Then we have her testimony, Bull said. We have the evidence from the storage unit. We take it all to the district attorney and we make them listen. Ghost looked up from his notes. And if they don't? The room went quiet. They all knew what that question meant, what it was really asking. How far were they willing to go if the system failed? How much were they willing to risk for a woman most of them had never met? Jack thought about Danny, about sitting in that funeral home picking out a casket for his little brother, about the staff from Cedar Ridge who'd shown up, all sympathy and soft voices, acting like they'd cared, acting like they hadn't let him die from neglect and indifference. He looked at each man in turn. Then we do what needs doing. Monday morning came cold and gray, the kind of Oregon summer day that made you remember winter was always waiting. Ghost Murphy had been up since 4, making phone calls, pulling records, talking to people who owed him favors from his Army days. By the time Jack arrived at the clubhouse at 8, Ghost had a file folder 3 inches thick sitting on the table. Derek Allen Whitmore, Ghost said, flipping it open, age 45. Born in Portland, mother deceased 91, father unknown, never married, no kids, lives alone in a 2-story colonial on Riverside Drive. Bought it in 92 for $200,000. Current value around $350. Bull poured coffee and sat down. What's he do for money? Financial advisor. Has his own firm. Whitmore Financial Services. Office downtown on Main Street. Been in business since 93. Ghost pulled out a sheet of paper covered in numbers. This is interesting. His business tax returns show modest income. Maybe $60,000 a year. But his personal spending doesn't match. How so? Ghost pointed to a list. BMW 540i. Bought new in 94. $35,000. Rolex watch. $8,000. Country club membership. $3,000 a year. Season tickets to the Blazers. And he just bought a condo in Scottsdale. Cash. $200,000. So where's the money coming from? Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. His clients. Ghost pulled out another document. I talked to a buddy at the state licensing board. Derek's had 3 complaints filed against him in the last 2 years. Elderly clients claiming he mismanaged their accounts. All 3 complaints were withdrawn before investigation. Let me guess, Bull said. The clients died. 2 of them. The 3rd moved to Arizona to live with her daughter. Got out before Derek could finish bleeding her dry. Tiny had been standing by the window watching the road. He turned around, his massive frame blocking the morning light. So Eleanor's not the first. No, Ghost said. She's just the first one we know about who's still alive. Jack stood up and walked to the window. A pickup truck drove past on the highway, heading toward town. Normal people doing normal things. Going to work, running errands, living lives that didn't include locked rooms and forged documents and men who killed for inheritance money. We need to rattle him, Jack said. Make him nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. What are you thinking? Bull asked. Jack turned around. We let him see us, not threatening, nothing he can call the cops about. Just present, watching. Everywhere he goes, one of us is there. He'll start to wonder, start to worry. And when people worry, they do stupid things. Ghost smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Psychological warfare, I like it. They started that afternoon. Derek Whitmore left his office at 5:30, same as he did every weekday according to the surveillance Ghost had already begun. He walked to his BMW parked on the street, briefcase in hand, looking every inch the successful businessman in his gray suit and silk tie. He didn't notice the motorcycle parked across the street. Didn't see Tiny sitting on it, arms crossed, just watching. Not moving, not threatening, just there. Derek got in his car and drove away. In his rearview mirror, if he'd been paying attention, he would have seen Tiny start his engine and follow. 3 car lengths back, professional distance, not trying to hide, making sure Derek could see him if he looked. But Derek didn't look. Not yet. He drove home to his nice house on Riverside Drive, pulled into his garage, and disappeared inside. Tiny rode past slowly, saw the light come on in the main house, saw Derek moving around inside, visible through the kitchen window. And there, on the left side of the property, set back from the main structure, was the converted garage. One small window high up on the wall, bars across it, no light inside. Eleanor was in there, sitting in the dark, waiting. Tiny made a mental note of the layout and rode away. But he'd be back tomorrow. They all would. Tuesday morning, Derek left for work at 7:30. Found a different motorcycle parked outside his house when he walked to his car. Ghost this time, different bike, different rider, same silent presence. Derek paused at his car door, looked at Ghost. Ghost looked back, his face expressionless behind his dark sunglasses. Derek got in his car quickly, almost hurried, and drove away faster than necessary. At lunch, Derek went to Mason's Steakhouse, the expensive place where the city council members ate. He had a meeting with two men in suits, talking low over martinis and prime rib. Business, investments, the kind of conversations that happen every day in small towns all over America. When he came out, Jack was leaning against a telephone pole across the street, leather vest, boots, arms covered in faded tattoos from his service days. He wasn't doing anything, wasn't breaking any law, just standing there, smoking a cigarette, watching. Derek saw him. Their eyes met across the street. Derek's step faltered, just for a second, just long enough for Jack to know the message had been received. Derek hurried to his car and left. That evening, Derek had his weekly volunteer shift at the food bank. First Presbyterian Church ran it out of their basement. Derek showed up at 6, same as always, ready to smile and hand out canned goods and play the role of concerned citizen. 3 motorcycles were parked in the church parking lot when he arrived. Bull, Jack, and Tiny, standing in a loose group, not blocking anything, not bothering anyone. Just there, visible. Derek stood by his car for a long moment staring at them. His hands were shaking slightly. Jack could see it even from 30 feet away. Then Derek turned and went inside. Wednesday morning, Derek called the police. Sarah at the diner heard about it from her cousin who worked dispatch. Derek reported suspicious activity, motorcycles following him, bikers watching his house. He wanted something done about it. The dispatcher had asked the obvious questions. Were they threatening him? Had they approached him? Were they on his property? The answer to all 3 was no. They were on public streets, public property, doing nothing illegal. There's nothing we can do, Mr. Whitmore, the dispatcher had told him. If they threaten you or trespass, call back. Derek had hung up angry, which was exactly what Jack wanted. That same afternoon, Wednesday, Eleanor managed to get out again. The mail carrier, Mrs. Patterson, had given her a ride into town. Eleanor told her she needed to pick up a prescription. Mrs. Patterson was happy to help. She was a kind woman, completely unaware that she was aiding in anything other than a simple errand for an elderly lady. Eleanor didn't go to the pharmacy. She went to Rosie's diner. Sarah saw her come in and immediately called the clubhouse. Jack was there in 10 minutes, pulling his Harley into the parking lot hard enough to spray gravel. Eleanor was sitting in the same booth, the one by the restrooms, waiting for him. She looked worse than she had 3 days ago, thinner. The bruises on her wrists were darker, fresh, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not fear exactly, urgency. He knows, she said as Jack slid into the seat across from her. He knows someone's watching him. He came to my room last night, demanded to know if I'd talked to anyone, if I'd been outside, if I'd contacted the bikers he'd seen around town. What did you tell him? Jack asked. That I didn't know what he was talking about, that I'd been in my room like always, that I didn't know any bikers? Did he believe you? Eleanor's laugh was bitter. No, but he can't prove anything, so he just threatened me. Said if I was planning something, I should remember that I have nowhere to go. No one who would take me in, no friends left who even remember my name. He's trying to break you down, Jack said. Make you feel hopeless. It's what predators do, I know. Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. But I'm not broken yet. She pushed it across the table. Jack unfolded it. It was a printout, text from a computer screen. A list of internet searches with dates beside them. All recent, all from the past month. How long does it take for hypothermia to set in? Signs of malnutrition in elderly patients. How to report a death at home without autopsy. Natural causes of death in seniors. Undetectable poisons. Jack read the list twice. His hands were steady, but something cold was spreading through his chest. Where did you get this? Derek's computer. He doesn't know I know his password. He uses my daughter's birthday. March 8th, she leaned forward. He's researching, Mr. Morrison. Preparing, learning how to kill me and make it look like I died naturally. And based on those searches, I don't think I have much time left. The confrontation happened that evening. Jack hadn't planned it. But sometimes the right moment presents itself and you either take it or you don't. Derek was leaving his office at 6, locking the door behind him, when he turned and found Jack standing beside his BMW. Not touching it, not doing anything illegal, just standing there in the parking lot, which was public property, in the gathering dusk. For a moment, neither man moved. They were alone. The street was empty. The other businesses had closed for the day. Derek found his voice first. Can I help you? Jack didn't answer right away. He was studying Derek the way you study an opponent before a fight, looking for weaknesses, for tells, for the cracks in the armor. Derek was shorter than Jack by 3 inches. Softer. The kind of soft that came from a life lived behind desks and in air-conditioned offices. His suit probably cost more than Jack's motorcycle. His watch definitely did. His hands had never swung a hammer or changed a tire or dug a hole. They were smooth, uncalloused. The hands of someone who'd never done hard work in his life. But there was something in his eyes, something cold and calculating. The look of someone who'd learned early that rules were for other people, that consequences could be avoided if you were smart enough, careful enough, respectable enough. Jack had known men like Derek in the service, officers who sent others to die while they stayed safe in air-conditioned command posts. Men who wore medals they hadn't earned and took credit for victories they hadn't won. Men who thought themselves superior because they'd never gotten their hands dirty. Those men were always surprised when the dirt caught up with them. "I want you to know something," Jack said finally. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the empty street. Derek waited, his briefcase clutched a little too tight in his left hand. "People are watching you. Whatever you're planning, whatever you think you're going to get away with, there are eyes on you now. Eyes that don't blink, eyes that don't forget." "I don't know what you're talking about," Derek said, but his voice wavered slightly. Jack took a step closer, not threatening, not touching, just closing the distance enough that Derek had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. "Your aunt," Jack said. "She's not as confused as you've been telling people." Derek's face went pale. Just for a second, just long enough for Jack to see the fear flash across his features before the mask came back down. "My aunt is none of your concern. She is now." Jack turned and walked away, left Derek standing there in the parking lot, hands shaking, face white, the carefully constructed world he'd built starting to crack at the edges. That night, Derek went to the hardware store. Ghost followed him inside, pretending to shop for bolts while watching Derek load a cart with chains. Heavy-duty chains. The kind you'd use to secure something you really didn't want opened. Industrial padlocks. 3 of them. A deadbolt lock, the serious kind, reinforced strike plate, screws long enough to go through a door frame and into the studs behind. Derek paid cash and loaded everything into his BMW. By midnight, he was installing it all on the garage room door. Ghost watched from down the street through binoculars. Saw Derek working under the porch light, drilling, hammering, wrapping chains through the handle, testing the locks, making sure they held. When Derek finally went inside, Ghost rode to the clubhouse and made his report. "He's panicking," Ghost told the others. "The surveillance is working. He knows someone's onto him, and he's trying to make sure Eleanor can't get out again." Bull looked at Jack, "Which means we need to move faster than we planned." "Tonight," Jack said. "We go in tonight. We get her out before he does something we can't stop." The plan was simple. Simple was always better. Fewer things to go wrong. 3 in the morning, darkest part of the night, Derek would be asleep. The neighborhood would be quiet. They'd go in fast and silent, cut the chains, pick the locks, get Eleanor, and go. 4 men. Jack would handle the entry. He'd learned lockpicking in the Army, back when they'd needed to get into places that didn't want them. Tiny would be backup, ready to carry Eleanor if she couldn't walk. Bull would drive the van, parked 1 street over, engine running. Ghost would be overwatch, watching the main house, ready to warn them if Derek woke up. They dressed in dark clothes, no club vests, nothing identifying. Just 4 men in black doing something that was technically breaking and entering, but felt like the most right thing any of them had done in years. They met at the clubhouse at 2:30, checked their equipment, bolt cutters for the chains, lockpick set for the deadbolt, flashlights with red lenses that wouldn't destroy night vision, radios so they could communicate without talking. Nobody spoke much. There wasn't much to say. They all knew what they were doing, they all knew why, and they all knew that after tonight, there was no going back. Derek would know who'd taken Eleanor. He'd call the cops. There'd be consequences, but sometimes consequences were worth facing. They rolled out at 2:45, no headlights until they were away from the clubhouse. Bikes and van moving through the Oregon night like shadows. At 3:07, they were in position. Jack and Tiny approached from the back, moving through the neighbor's yard, over a fence that creaked but held their weight. The garage was dark, no sound from inside. The new chains gleamed dully in the moonlight, wrapped around the door handle like Derek had been preparing for a siege. Jack pulled out the bolt cutters. The first chain took 30 seconds to cut. The blades bit through the steel with a sound like breaking bones. The second chain went faster. The third faster still. The chains fell away, and Tiny caught them before they could hit the ground and make noise. Now the deadbolt. Jack pulled out his pick set. It had been a while since he'd done this, but muscle memory was a strange thing. The picks felt natural in his hands. The tension wrench applied just the right pressure. He felt for the pins, found them, lifted them one by one. The lock opened with a soft click. Jack pushed the door open slowly. Hinges squealed slightly and he froze, listening for any sound from the main house. Nothing. Just the night wind moving through the trees. Inside the garage room, it was dark and cold. Jack's eyes adjusted slowly. Saw the shape of a bed against one wall, a figure sitting on the edge of it. Eleanor. She was awake, fully dressed. Small bag already packed beside her on the bed. Like she'd known they were coming. Like she'd been waiting. "Mrs. Thornton," Jack whispered, "we're getting you out." Eleanor stood slowly, picked up her bag, walked toward him without hesitation, without fear. Just a woman who'd spent 2 years waiting for this moment and wasn't going to waste a second of it now that it was here. Tiny appeared in the doorway, saw Eleanor, and without a word, scooped her up in his arms like she weighed nothing. She didn't protest, just held onto her bag and let herself be carried. They moved fast, back across the yard, over the fence, with Tiny lifting Eleanor across with one hand, while Jack steadied her from the other side. To the van where Bull had the side door already open. Eleanor climbed in. Jack and Tiny got in behind her. Bull put the van in gear and pulled away, slow and steady, no screeching tires, nothing to wake the neighbors. Ghost stayed behind for another 5 minutes, watching the house, making sure Derek didn't wake, making sure no lights came on. No doors opened, no alarm raised. Then he started his bike and rode away, following the van's taillights into the darkness. By 3:45, Eleanor Thornton was sitting in the clubhouse wrapped in a blanket, drinking hot coffee that Bull had made. Her hands were shaking, but not from cold. From relief. From the sudden, overwhelming weight of being free after 2 years of captivity. She looked at the 4 men who'd saved her. At Jack, who'd said yes when everyone else had said no. At Bull, who'd opened his clubhouse without question. At Ghost, who'd gathered the evidence they'd need. At Tiny, who'd carried her to safety with arms strong enough to break bones, but gentle enough to hold a sparrow. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was thick with emotion she'd held in check for too long. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away." Jack sat down across from her. "The hard part starts now," he said. "Derek's going to notice you're gone. He's going to call the police. Report you missing. Tell them you're confused, that you wandered off, that you're in danger." "Let him," Eleanor said. There was steel in her voice. "I have evidence, I have testimony, and I have 4 witnesses who saw what he did to me. The question is whether anyone will believe us," Bull said. Eleanor looked at him directly. "Then we make them believe. We take everything I gathered, everything you found, and we go to the authorities. We tell the truth. And we trust that somewhere in this system there's someone who still cares about justice." Jack thought about that, about systems and justice, and the difference between what should happen and what actually does. He'd seen enough in his 48 years to know that the two didn't always align, that sometimes the good guys lost and the bad guys walked free, and all you could do was try to live with it. But not this time. This time they had evidence, they had truth, and they had something Derek Whitmore didn't have. They had Eleanor Thornton, alive, free, ready to tell her story, and if the system wouldn't listen, then they'd make it listen, one way or another. Derek Whitmore woke at 6:15 Thursday morning to his alarm. He went through his usual routine: shower, shave, the gray suit with the blue tie, coffee from the machine that he'd programmed the night before. Everything exactly as it always was. Control was important. Routine was important. These were the things that kept life predictable, manageable, safe. At 7:05, he poured a bowl of cereal for Eleanor. Skim milk, no sugar, exactly 400 calories. He'd calculated it precisely. Enough to keep her alive. Not enough to give her strength. Not enough for her to cause problems. He carried the bowl across the yard to the garage, keys jingling in his pocket. The new chains he'd installed last night gleamed in the morning sun. Heavy, secure. Nobody was getting through those without serious equipment. He unlocked the first padlock, then the second, then the third, unwrapped the chains and pushed open the door. The room was empty. Derek stood in the doorway for a long moment, his brain refusing to process what his eyes were telling him. The bed was made. The chair sat empty. Eleanor's few possessions were gone. The small photograph of her daughter that usually sat on the shelf. The worn sweater she kept folded at the foot of the bed. The shoes she wore when he occasionally let her walk in the yard under supervision. All gone. He looked at the door, at the chains lying on the ground, cut cleanly through, at the lock that had been picked open from the outside. This wasn't Eleanor wandering off in confusion. This was someone coming in, someone breaking in, someone taking her. The bikers. Derek's hands started shaking. The bowl of cereal slipped from his fingers and shattered on the concrete floor. Milk and cornflakes spreading across the ground like evidence of his loss of control. He pulled out his cell phone, dialed 911 with fingers that wouldn't quite work properly. 911, what's your emergency? My aunt. Derek's voice was high, panicked. Not quite the performance he wanted, but close enough. My aunt is missing. She's 70 years old. She has dementia. She's gone. The questions came rapid fire. When did you last see her? Does she have any medical conditions? What was she wearing? Is there anywhere she might have gone? Derek answered them all, built the story as he spoke. Last saw her at 7 last night when he'd brought her dinner. She was confused, disoriented. Sometimes she tried to wander. That's why he'd had to lock her in for her own safety, for her protection. He'd checked on her this morning and she was just gone. The door was broken open. Someone had taken her. Or maybe she'd gotten out somehow and wandered off. She could be anywhere. She could be hurt, dying. He was desperate to find her. The dispatcher promised to send officers immediately, told Derek to stay calm, told him they'd find her. Derek hung up and sat down on the steps leading to the garage, put his head in his hands, and beneath the performance, beneath the act of the worried nephew, a cold calculation was happening. Someone had taken Eleanor. Someone who knew about the locks, about the chains, someone who'd been watching him. The bikers. It had to be. They'd been following him for days, making him nervous, making him sloppy. And now they had Eleanor, which meant they probably had access to whatever she'd been hiding, whatever evidence she thought she'd gathered. He needed a lawyer. He needed to get ahead of this. He needed to control the narrative before anyone started asking questions he couldn't answer. 2 police officers arrived within 15 minutes. Young guys, early 30s. They took Derek's statement, looked at the garage room, noted the broken chains, the picked lock, took photographs, asked more questions. Derek played his role perfectly. The concerned nephew, the devoted caretaker, the man who'd sacrificed his own comfort to care for an elderly relative who couldn't care for herself. He showed them Eleanor's room in the main house, the one he'd kept ready for her even though she preferred the garage apartment. He showed them medications, medical records, documentation of her declining mental state, all of it carefully prepared, all of it backing up his story. The officers were sympathetic, told Derek they'd put out a silver alert, told him elderly people with dementia often wandered, but were usually found within a few hours. Told him to call if he heard anything. After they left, Derek made another call to Marcus Webb, the most expensive criminal defense attorney in 3 counties, just in case. At the clubhouse, Eleanor sat at the long wooden table surrounded by 2 years of evidence, the photographs of forged documents, the fake medical records, the intercepted letters, her handwritten testimony, the funeral arrangements Derek had made before she was dead. Bull had called in a favor. Rebecca Stone, the Clatsop County District Attorney, was on her way. She'd been reluctant at first. It was unusual for the DA to get involved this early, but Bull had known her father, had served with him in the Gulf. James Stone had died there, caught in an ambush outside Kuwait City, and Bull had been the one to carry his body back. That kind of debt didn't expire. Rebecca arrived at 9:30 in a sensible sedan that looked out of place next to the row of Harleys. She was 48 years old, tall and lean, with gray streaking through her dark hair and eyes that had seen too many cases where the system failed the people it was supposed to protect. She walked into the clubhouse and stopped, took in the scene. 4 bikers in leather vests, an elderly woman wrapped in a blanket, a table covered with documents that looked like something from a law enforcement investigation. Bull Hayes, she said. Her voice was neutral, careful. You said this was important. Bull gestured to Eleanor. Ma'am, this is Eleanor Thornton. Eleanor, this is District Attorney Rebecca Stone. Eleanor stood, extended her hand. Rebecca shook it, noting the bruises on Eleanor's wrist, the way she moved carefully, like someone in constant pain, the sharpness in her eyes that contradicted any notion of confusion or dementia. Thank you for coming, Eleanor said. I know this is unusual. Rebecca sat down, pulled out a legal pad and pen. Why don't you tell me what's going on? Eleanor told her story. She spoke for 40 minutes without interruption. Started with her husband's death, her sister's death, Derek coming into her life with his offers of help, the gradual isolation, the move to the garage room, the lock on the outside of the door, the starvation, the abuse, the 2 years of gathering evidence while Derek told the world she was losing her mind. Rebecca listened without expression. When Eleanor finished, Rebecca turned to the evidence spread across the table. She studied the bank statements, the life insurance policies, the forged medical records, the letters, the funeral arrangements. She read Eleanor's handwritten testimony slowly, carefully, like someone looking for holes in a story, looking for reasons not to believe. Finally, she looked up. Mrs. Thornton, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer honestly. Of course. What year is it? 1995. Who's the president? Bill Clinton. Can you tell me what you had for breakfast this morning? Coffee and toast. Plain toast. At the clubhouse. Mr. Hayes made it for me. Can you count backwards from 100 by sevens? Eleanor did. Perfectly. No hesitation. Rebecca closed her notebook. You're clearly not suffering from dementia. No, ma'am, I never was. Rebecca stood and walked to the window, looked out at the motorcycles parked in neat rows, at the flags flying in the morning breeze. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned back. Here's the problem. Derek Whitmore has built a nearly perfect legal facade. Power of attorney. Medical records documenting your declining cognitive state. Financial transactions that are technically legal because he had your power of attorney. Well, changes that were properly notarized. But they're fake, Eleanor said. The medical records are from a doctor who died 3 years ago. The signatures are forged. The notary stamp is fraudulent. Proving that in court will be difficult. Rebecca's voice was gentle but firm. We'd need forensic document analysis. Expert witnesses. It could take months, maybe longer. And during that time, Derek's lawyers will be arguing that you're a confused elderly woman who's been manipulated by, she gestured at the men around the table. No offense intended, by people with their own agenda. None taken, Bull said. But we're not letting this go. I'm not asking you to. Rebecca sat back down. What I'm saying is we need something more. Something undeniable. Something that can't be explained away or dismissed. Like what? Jack asked. Like a confession. The idea came from Ghost. He was the one with intelligence training. The one who'd spent years in Germany during the Cold War running operations that officially never happened. The one who understood that sometimes you had to make the enemy think they were winning in order to make them reveal themselves. Eleanor goes back, Ghost said. The room erupted. Jack was on his feet immediately. Absolutely not. Hear me out. Ghost's voice was calm. Derek thinks she's missing. Confused, wandering. The police are looking for her. A silver alert is probably already active. What if she just shows up at his door? Confused, disoriented. Doesn't remember how she got out or where she's been. Sorry for causing trouble. He'll hurt her, Tiny said. Not if we're listening. Ghost pulled a small device from his pocket. Body wire. She wears this. We hear everything Derek says. If he confesses to anything, admits to any part of what he's done, we have him on tape. Rebecca leaned forward. Oregon is a one-party consent state for recording. If Eleanor consents to wearing a wire, anything Derek says is admissible in court. What if he gets violent? Jack's voice was tight. What if he realizes it's a trap and he does something before we can get to her? Then we have probable cause for immediate arrest. Rebecca looked at Eleanor. But this has to be your choice, Miss Thornton. We can't ask you to do this. It's dangerous. He's already proven he's willing to hurt you. Eleanor was quiet. Everyone watched her. Waiting. Finally, she spoke. I've spent 2 years locked in a room waiting for someone to help me. You've helped. You got me out. You believed me. Now let me finish this. Mrs. Thornton, Eleanor cut Jack off with a look. Her voice was steel. Derek took 2 years of my life. He planned to take the rest. I want him in prison. I want everyone to know what he did. I want his respectable face torn off so the world can see the monster underneath. If wearing a wire is what it takes, then that's what I'll do. The plan took 3 hours to arrange. Ghost set up the wire, a small recorder that fit against Eleanor's ribs under her blouse. The microphone was pinned inside her collar, invisible unless you were looking for it. He tested it a dozen times, making sure the signal was strong, the recording clear. Rebecca brought in 2 undercover officers. They set up in a van 2 blocks from Derek's house. Monitoring equipment, recording devices, ready to move if Eleanor said the code word they'd agreed on. Mercy. If she said mercy, they'd hit the house in under 30 seconds. Jack wanted to be closer. Wanted to be right outside. Rebecca said no. Too obvious. Too risky. Derek might see him, might get spooked, might do something desperate. Jack agreed, but he didn't like it. At 2:15 that afternoon, Eleanor Thornton walked up Derek Whitmore's driveway and knocked on his front door. Derek opened it, and the color drained from his face. Aunt Eleanor, where have you been? The police are looking for you. I've been worried sick. I'm sorry. Eleanor's voice was small, confused. Exactly what Derek would expect to hear. I don't remember. I woke up this morning and I was somewhere else. I think I walked home, but I'm not sure. Everything's fuzzy. Derek looked past her, scanned the street, saw nothing suspicious, just an empty suburban road in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon. Come inside. He stepped back. Let's get you cleaned up. Get you something to eat. Eleanor walked in. The door closed behind her. In the van 2 blocks away, Ghost and the 2 officers heard everything. In the clubhouse, Jack and Bull and Tiny listened to a radio feed, all of them tense, all of them ready to move. Derek led Eleanor to the living room. Sit down, let me get you some water. He came back with a glass, sat across from her, studied her face like he was looking for something. Aunt Eleanor, he said slowly, where did you really go? I told you. I don't remember. Don't lie to me. His voice was harder now, the concerned nephew mask slipping. Someone cut the chains on your door. Someone broke the lock. You didn't just wander off. Someone took you. I don't know what you're talking about. The bikers, Derek leaned forward. I've seen them, following me, watching the house. Did you talk to them? Did you tell them things about me? I don't know any bikers. Eleanor's voice wavered. Just enough to sound convincing. Derek, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. Derek stood up, started pacing. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause trouble. Derek laughed. It was a harsh sound, no warmth in it. Sorry, you're sorry. Do you know how long I've been taking care of you? How much I've sacrificed? 2 years of my life. 2 years of dealing with your confusion, your problems, your needs. Eleanor said nothing. Let him talk. Let him reveal himself. And you repay me by running away? By making me look like I'm not taking proper care of you? Do you know what people will think? I'll tell them it was my fault. That you've been wonderful. That I'm just confused. You are confused. Derek stopped pacing, looked at her directly. You've always been confused. That's why you needed me. That's why you signed over your power of attorney. Your assets. Everything. Because you couldn't handle it anymore. In the van, Ghost made a note. Admission of control. I know, Eleanor said softly. I'm grateful for everything you've done. Are you? Derek's voice was cold now. Because I don't think you are. I think you've been lying to me. I think you're not as confused as you pretend to be. Eleanor looked up at him, met his eyes, said nothing. You've been planning something, haven't you? Derek moved closer, gathering evidence, documents, trying to make me look bad, trying to steal back control. Eleanor's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Derek grabbed her arm, right where the old bruises were. Squeezed. Eleanor gasped, but didn't pull away. You think you're smart. You think you've outsmarted me. But you're wrong. Let go of me. No, Derek squeezed harder. Not until you tell me what you've done, what you've told people, what you've been hiding. In the van, Ghost was already moving. Officers calling for backup. 30 seconds out. At the clubhouse, Jack was on his bike before Ghost finished speaking. Bull and Tiny right behind him. Derek, please. You're hurting me. I'm hurting you? Derek's laugh was bitter. You have no idea what hurt is. Do you know what it's like watching someone slowly die? Waiting month after month for nature to take its course? Do you know how long it takes for an old woman to starve to death? Longer than you'd think. In the van, every word was being recorded. Preserved. Evidence that couldn't be explained away. You're not going to starve me to death, Eleanor said quietly. Her voice was steady now, not scared, certain. Because people know, people who are watching, and you're not going to get away with this. Derek's hand dropped. He stepped back. His face went pale. What did you do? I survived. That's what I did. I gathered evidence. I documented everything. I found people who would listen. And now everyone's going to know what you really are. Derek stood there for a long moment. Then he moved fast, crossed to the kitchen. Eleanor heard a drawer open, heard the rattle of silverware. When he came back, he was holding a knife. You stupid woman, he said. You've ruined everything. Do you understand that? Everything I worked for. Everything I planned. Gone because you couldn't just die quietly like you were supposed to. Eleanor stood, back toward the door. Derek, put the knife down. No, Derek moved closer. You're going to die today anyway. Just faster than I planned. And I'll tell them you attacked me. That I had to defend myself. That your confusion made you violent. They'll believe me. They always believe me. Eleanor said one word. The code word they'd agreed on. Mercy. The front door exploded inward. Two police officers, weapons drawn. Freeze! Drop the knife. Hands where we can see them. Derek stood there, knife in hand, Eleanor backing away from him, and suddenly the carefully constructed world he'd built collapsed around him like a house of cards. He dropped the knife, put his hands up. His face was white, shocked, like he couldn't understand how this had happened, how he'd been caught. The officers moved in, cuffed him, read him his rights. Derek Whitmore, you're under arrest for attempted murder, elder abuse, financial exploitation, and kidnapping. Jack's Harley roared up outside. He was through the door before the bike had fully stopped, Ghost and Bull and Tiny right behind him. Jack went straight to Eleanor. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? Eleanor rubbed her arm where Derek had grabbed her, but she was smiling. I'm fine, and we got him. We got every word. Rebecca Stone arrived 10 minutes later. She'd been in the van with Ghost, listening to the whole thing. She walked into Derek's living room, looked at him sitting in handcuffs on his expensive leather couch, and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Mr. Whitmore, she said, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it, because everything you just said to Mrs. Thornton was recorded, and it's all going to be used against you in court. Derek said nothing, just sat there, broken. The interrogation happened that evening at the Clatsop County Sheriff's Department. Derek's lawyer, Marcus Webb, arrived within an hour. Expensive suit, practiced smile. The kind of lawyer who defended people like Derek because the money was good and the conscience was flexible. Marcus advised Derek to say nothing, to wait for trial, to let them try to prove their case. But Derek was beyond caring. 2 years of stress, 2 years of maintaining the perfect facade, 2 years of waiting for Eleanor to die so he could finally have what he wanted. And now it was all gone. The house, the money, the carefully constructed reputation, all destroyed in a single afternoon because he'd gotten sloppy, because he'd gotten angry, because he'd said things he should never have said. Detective Warren ran the interrogation, played the tape from Eleanor's wire. Derek's voice filled the room. His admissions, his threats, his cold calculation about how long it took an old woman to starve to death. Marcus tried to argue entrapment, coercion, that the recording was inadmissible. Rebecca, sitting in the observation room, knew he was wrong. Oregon was a one-party consent state. Eleanor had consented to wearing the wire. Everything on that tape was legal, admissible, damning. After the third playing, Derek broke. I'll make a deal, he said. His voice was flat, empty. Marcus put a hand on his arm. Derek, don't. Derek shook him off. I'll confess to everything, full confession. Every crime, every forgery, every stolen dollar. But I want life with possibility of parole. Not death, not life without parole. Give me a chance to get out someday. Rebecca considered it. A confession would save the state the cost of a trial, would guarantee a conviction, would give Eleanor and any other victims closure. The tape was strong evidence, but trials were unpredictable. Juries sometimes did strange things. A confession was certain. What else? She asked through the two-way glass. Detective Warren relayed the question. Derek took a deep breath. There are others. Other clients, 3 of them. I did the same thing to them. Isolated them, stole from them, and when they wouldn't die fast enough, I helped them along. The room went silent. You killed them? Warren's voice was carefully neutral. Digitalis, in their medications, mimics heart failure in elderly patients, undetectable after 48 hours, especially after cremation. Marcus was pale. Derek, for God's sake, stop talking. Derek ignored him, turned to the mirror. To Rebecca watching from the other side, I'll give you their names. Tell you how I did it. Testify if you need me to. But I want the deal. 20 years before parole eligibility. That's my offer. Rebecca left the observation room, walked down the hall to a quiet office, sat down and thought about justice, about what it meant, about whether 20 years was enough for a man who'd killed 3 people and nearly killed a 4th, about whether the families of those victims deserved to know the truth, even if it meant Derek eventually walked free. She called each family, one by one, explained the situation, explained what Derek was offering, asked what they wanted. They all said the same thing. They wanted the truth. They wanted him to admit what he'd done. They wanted the world to know their loved ones had been murdered, that their deaths weren't natural, that someone had stolen their final years and then stolen their lives. 20 years seemed like a small price for that knowledge, but it was better than the alternative, better than a trial where Derek might walk, where some jury might believe his lawyers, where justice might slip away in the complexities of the legal system. Rebecca made the call. The deal was accepted. 6 weeks later, Eleanor Thornton stood in a courtroom packed with people, media, victim families, community members who'd known Derek, who'd trusted him, who'd thought he was one of the good ones. Derek sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, head down, the respectable facade completely stripped away. Judge Catherine Morrison, 70 years old and 30 years on the bench, looked at the plea agreement, looked at Derek, looked at the evidence spread before her. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice was cold, "you've entered a plea of guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, multiple counts of elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, and forgery. Do you understand these charges?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you understand that by pleading guilty, you waive your right to a trial?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you understand that you will be sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole for 20 years?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then I'm going to ask you to state, in your own words and for the record, what you did." Derek stood, looked at the gallery, saw Eleanor sitting in the front row, saw the families of his other victims, saw the community that had trusted him, and he told them everything. He talked for 40 minutes, described how he'd identified vulnerable elderly clients, how he'd isolated them, how he'd forged documents and stolen money and built fake medical histories, how he'd poisoned 3 people with digitalis, making their deaths look like natural heart failure, how he'd planned to do the same to Eleanor, how he'd researched the best methods, the right doses, the way to avoid suspicion. He spoke in a monotone, like he was describing something that had happened to someone else. No emotion, no remorse, just facts, just the cold mechanics of how to kill people and get away with it. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke. "Mr. Whitmore, I've been on this bench for 30 years. I've seen every kind of criminal, every kind of evil. But what you did is particularly despicable. You preyed on the elderly, on people who trusted you, who thought you were helping them. You isolated them, starved them, stole from them. And when they wouldn't die fast enough for your liking, you murdered them." She paused, let the words hang in the air. "You showed them no mercy. You gave them no dignity. You treated them like obstacles to be removed, like problems to be solved, like their lives had no value beyond what you could steal from them." Derek stood motionless, said nothing. "The families of your victims want this plea deal. They want the truth. They want closure. So I'm going to honor that, but I want you to understand something." She leaned forward. 20 years is the minimum before you're eligible for parole. That doesn't mean you'll get parole. That means in 20 years, when you're 65 years old, you'll have the chance to ask for it. And I'm going to personally write a letter to the parole board recommending that you never be released, that you spend the rest of your life in prison, that you die there, alone, the way you made your victims die. She brought her gavel down. Hard. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. "This court is adjourned." 2 bailiffs led Derek away. He didn't look back, didn't look at Eleanor, didn't look at anyone, just walked out of that courtroom and out of the free world forever. Eleanor stood and walked out into the hallway. Jack was waiting there with Bull and Tiny and Ghost. Men who'd risked everything to save her. Men who'd believed her when no one else would. She looked at Jack, thought about that day in the diner, about him pulling out a chair without asking, about him saying yes when everyone else said no. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me." Jack nodded, didn't trust himself to speak. 3 months later, Eleanor Thornton stood in a small office downtown. The sign on the door read, "The Eleanor Thornton Foundation for Elder Protection." The restitution money from Derek had funded it. $387,000 returned to her. Money he'd stolen. Money she'd decided to use to make sure no one else suffered what she'd suffered. The foundation offered legal aid for elderly abuse victims, trained volunteers to visit isolated seniors, ran a 24-hour hotline, partnered with law enforcement and social services, educated the community about warning signs. Sarah from the diner worked there now, answering phones, coordinating volunteers, making sure that when someone called for help, someone answered. Eleanor gave talks, traveled to senior centers and churches and community groups, told her story, taught people what to look for, how to recognize when someone was being abused, how to step in, how to help. Her message was always the same. Evil hides behind respectability, behind nice clothes and good manners and positions of trust. But it can be stopped if we pay attention, if we ask questions, if we refuse to look away when someone needs help. One Saturday afternoon, a year after Derek's sentencing, Eleanor walked into Rosie's diner. The same booth by the restrooms was empty. She sat down, ordered coffee and toast. Jack walked in 15 minutes later, saw her, crossed the diner and sat down across from her. They didn't talk much, didn't need to, just sat together drinking coffee while the lunch rush swirled around them. At one point, Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph, showed it to Jack. It was taken at the Foundation's one-year anniversary event. Eleanor standing with a group of people, abuse survivors who'd gotten help, volunteers who'd been trained, police officers and social workers who'd partnered with them. 23 people rescued in 1 year, she said. 23 people who didn't die alone in locked rooms, who didn't get their money stolen, who didn't become invisible. Jack studied the photograph. You did that? Eleanor shook her head. We did that. You said yes when everyone else said no. That's where it started, with one person choosing to see instead of looking away. She put the photograph away, looked out the window at Riverdale going about its Saturday afternoon. Normal people living normal lives. Most of them good, most of them decent, most of them just trying to get through their days with a little dignity and a little kindness. But some of them invisible, some of them trapped, some of them waiting for someone to notice, someone to care, someone to pull out a chair and say yes. The diner door opened. An elderly man walked in, late 70s, walking with a cane, looking uncertain, nervous. He approached a booth where a young couple sat. Excuse me, could I? The couple didn't let him finish. Sorry, we're waiting for someone. He moved to the next table. Same response. Eleanor watched, started to stand. Jack put a hand on her arm. Wait. From a booth in the corner, a young man in a worn leather vest stood up, the Iron Brotherhood prospect patch visible on his back. He walked over to the elderly man. Sir, would you like to sit with me? The old man's face lit up. Relief, gratitude, the look of someone who'd been invisible suddenly being seen. Eleanor smiled, watched them sit down together, watched the prospect signal Sarah for coffee. It's spreading, she said quietly. Jack nodded. One yes at a time. They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, who'd fought a war together, who'd won. Outside, the sun moved across the Oregon sky. Inside, the jukebox played and the coffee flowed and life went on. But it went on a little differently now. A little better, because some people had decided that invisible didn't mean unimportant, that elderly didn't mean expendable, that everyone deserved to be seen, to be heard, to matter. Derek Whitmore was in prison, would be for 20 years at minimum, probably forever. Eleanor Thornton was free, was helping others find freedom. And somewhere in America, another person in another locked room was gathering evidence, waiting for help, hoping that someone somewhere would say yes. The Eleanor Thornton Foundation made sure that when that person reached out, someone would be there to answer, because that's what the foundation did. That's what Eleanor did. That's what Jack and Bull and Tiny and Ghost and Sarah and all the volunteers and all the people who'd learned to pay attention did. They said yes. They pulled out chairs. They saw the invisible. And one person at a time, they changed the world.